Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Fierce Calling podcast. I'm your host, author, blogger, and speaker Doris Swift. This podcast is about a community of women who are taking action where their passion, compassion, and conviction intersect. We are using our gifts to impact the world for Christ, and I hope these stories inspire you to take action and use your gifts to impact the world. Have you ever experienced a spiritual wilderness? Perhaps you're going through one right now. In this episode, I'm talking with Corella Roberts. Her fierce calling thus far includes a difficult season in Bush, Alaska, and adventures in Thailand. Hear what she learned during her spiritual wilderness, what her family is currently praying and waiting for, and how God is using her in a land that is less than 1% Christian. Plus, she's writing a book, and we get to hear the details about that. Listen in as I have a chat with Corella Roberts. Welcome to the Fierce Calling podcast. I have my friend with me today, Cora, also known as Corella, and she is coming to us from Thailand. Hi, Corella.
Hi, Doris. Such a pleasure to be on with you today.
Thank you. I know I guess I would say good morning to you, but you would say good evening to me.
Yes.
And you're already into the future, so it's already tomorrow.
I know, isn't that so weird?
It is so weird. But anyway, I appreciate you joining us. So tell us a little bit about your story, about where your passion, compassion, and conviction intersect. I know you have a story that includes Alaska and Thailand, so we'd be interested to hear about that.
It's been so interesting as I've been praying about and preparing for this interview with you and really thinking back through this idea of calling. And I've recognized that, somewhere along the way, I guess God just put it in my heart. I probably had some teaching somewhere that I don't remember, but I've really walked through life kind of believing that at every point God has a calling for me. Like he invites me and all of us, I believe, to partner with him in his kingdom building work. And that can look like a lot of different things. And so I was just thinking how through, it started in college. I went to University of Northwestern in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
I was studying to be a teacher, and we had a chapel speaker come who was teaching overseas and was in fact in a Middle Eastern country that you really can't just go in and do straight out missions. And he shared how as a teacher he could be there and have a purpose, a legitimate job, and use that as a bridge for building relationships and sharing the gospel. And my husband, he was my boyfriend of 6 years at that time, high school sweetheart. He and I got talking after that, and we said, wow, we could use teaching as missions. We could go anywhere in the world with this. And we just sensed God putting that calling in our hearts. It was this conviction that there's people who are unreached, who haven't heard of the Lord. And we've got this passion to teach. And, it all mixed up and made sense. And so we pursued that. And we first ended up in Alaska because we had way too much college debt to launch straight into overseas work. But in Alaska, you can do kind of a bivocational missionary teaching thing where you teach in a public school way out in a little tiny bush village. And you're paid, and we got our college debts paid off, but we also specifically partnered with the missions agency, and our heart was to love people right where they were, to do Bible studies in our home with those who were interested, be the light of Christ. Some otherwise pretty physically and spiritually dark places. So that was kind of how it all started. And, since then, I remember specifically a distinct day that we felt like we were supposed to start a family. And at that point, motherhood really became the call for me. I just knew this is the point where the Lord says, okay, the work I'm now asking you to do is with your children. They are your greatest disciples now. And so that became the calling in my life for a good season of 8 years. And, in that time, we moved to Thailand and we're teaching at an international school here. Just my husband has been. And now both of my children are in school, and God starts stirring things in me again and brings me back to this love I've had for writing since I was a child. And I've gone back and written through our 7 years in Alaska and am working on turning that into a book to be published. So that's just another place where it's I've sensed God, saying, okay, this is something you're passionate about. These are gifts I've given you. This is something that's right in front of you that you can walk in. These are the people that you love that I want you to reach with it, and it's
Yeah.
just, I love those three words that you use, the passion, compassion, and conviction,
Mm-hmm.
because that is how it plays out. God starts using them, stirring them. And, if I'm walking with him, if I'm paying attention, it's just kind of the most natural thing to say, okay, God, this is the next place you're calling me to. This is the season for this. This is the season for that. And this is how I can partner with you right now.
Yeah, I love how you were talking about when you thought about having a family and then your calling for that was being a mom, because
Mm-hmm.
that is a calling. And
Amen.
yeah, definitely. And it certainly isn't an easy job or an easy calling,
No.
but God definitely has called people too, women too, in certain seasons of their life, if that's what He has for them. And I love how you all were willing to just go to Alaska. And like you said, it may not have been the point in time where you were able to go into foreign missions overseas, but yet you were able to minister in mission right there while you work
Mm-hmm.
through, your college debt and that kind of thing. So that probably quite an experience to be out there in the bush.
Yes, yes, it was. I mean, I would remember we would, before starting the school year, we'd land in Anchorage and we'd have this massive list and we would fill grocery carts with items from Costco and Fred Meyer. And then we'd go back to our mission guest house and we'd pack them
Uh-huh.
all up in totes. And we figured out the system. Okay, if you take all the paper towels out, you can kind of use them as padding for this and that. And actually, eggs don't have to be refrigerated, especially when it's cool. We can pack the eggs in the totes, and we would ship 6 or 7 huge Rubbermaid totes full of food out to the bush with us so that we had our groceries for the next 4 or 5 months until we flew out at Christmas. And then we did the whole routine again. And it was very isolated, very beautiful. We were in 2 different villages, and the spiritual climate of each was significantly different. The first one, without going into too much detail, I think there was a lot of unresolved grief there.
Mm-hmm.
And walking into that made it really difficult to teach in the school and interact with the families, kind of without taking on some of that emotional burden yourself. It's just around you
Right.
every day, and you're in a village of 50, 70 people. And it was heavy. The
Yeah.
atmosphere was heavy. There were some really difficult things that happened. The first year we were there were 4 teachers.
Mm-hmm.
I was the kindergarten through 5th grade teacher. And well, I guess I started out kindergarten through 4th grade. And then there was a 5th, 6th, 7th grade teacher. And then there were 2 high school teachers, one of which was my husband. And one of those high school teachers was transferred out in November to a different school. And so all of a sudden, our first year there, partway through, we're scrambling to redistribute her load. And it was a
Wow.
crazy
That was a
season.
challenge.
Yeah, it was. That was a time that the Lord really did some reworking in my heart.
Mm-hmm. When you were talking about the grief process, tell us a
Mhm.
little bit more about that.
Well, they often like to talk about grief in stages.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the interesting things I learned is that grief can also be a communal process. The villages that we worked in, they're so close knit that often if somebody dies, there's something traumatic that happens, even just in the culture. We were working mostly with the natives, and, they weren't put in reservations in Alaska,
Mm-hmm.
but their traditional ways were lost. And going back to the grandparents of the children we taught, a lot of them were in schools that literally slapped their mouths if they spoke their native tongue and not English.
Oh.
And, so there was a lot of underlying grief, which comes from loss of culture, loss of loved ones, loss of dreams. And, when you don't know how to work through that and move to a place of acceptance and being able to live, because it never completely goes away, right? You always live with the loss. But when you don't know how to move on living in a state of hope, even in the midst of the loss, it just kind of spirals into, out there, it was a lot of addiction. And
Okay.
there's other factors that play into that too. But, there was so much alcoholism and drugs. And yeah, it was, it was difficult for sure.
To listen to what you were talking about regarding that type of grief, because there are such different types, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not always necessarily the loss of a loved one or a friend. It's a loss of something that you felt was part of you, or a
Mm-hmm.
big change in trying to navigate unknown territory and unknown waters, and can be
Mm-hmm.
really a difficult transition.
Yeah.
And so how long again were you in Alaska?
We were there for 7 years.
Hmm.
And, it's interesting. I'm reminded as you talk, it took me a while to recognize that in our first couple years there, I was really going through some grief too, and I hadn't expected it. You kind of jump into the call, or at least I did. Maybe I'm sort of a head first kind of go-getter type of person, but
Uh,
jumped into that call like, yes, Lord, I want to go serve you. I want to do this teaching as mission thing. Like, this is great. How are you going to use me?
mhm.
And it involved more pain than I expected. And I don't want that to sound like a discouraging thing, but it was just the reality that I had some expectations that I wanted the Lord to meet.
Yes.
And, giving up my sense of security from where I was at with my family, and then my good community from Minnesota and the church we were a part of, like all that, I had to grieve letting that go and moving into this place that was really a difficult place to live. And so it was just this conflict between my expectations with how I thought God should be moving, or how I wanted him to use me, or even just how I thought I should be loving it. Like, well, this is where I'm supposed to be. Shouldn't I love it? Why am I miserable right now?
Yeah.
And I've called that the spiritual wilderness time in my faith, where it's like I'm kind of wandering. I feel like I'm wandering in this place where I can't really see what God is doing anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it just it can feel like a stuck place. But, what I've learned is you kind of come out of these seasons, and in hindsight, right, if we sit with the Lord and ask him, can you show me where were you in all this when it felt like I was just struggling alone? He will, and he's been so faithful to show me how he was walking with me, and really in that wilderness time, like revealing some idols, exposing some false beliefs, and showing me who he was in a more potent experiential way than, I had all this head knowledge from Bible college, and I loved him dearly, but I wasn't grounded in like what it looked like to walk in his love. And it was just kind of like the Israelites, he led them out of Egypt, and he promised to bring them into the promised land, but the in-between was wilderness. And
Yeah.
that wilderness was not unintentional. It wasn't an accident. And even when he led them through the wilderness to the promised land, and the spies reported the giants, and there was disbelief, and they had to go back and quote unquote wander in the promised land some more, even God was with them then. I discovered not too long ago that in the last verses in Exodus
Yeah.
talk about how the Lord led them through the wilderness, that pillar of fire by night.
Yeah.
And, he was leading them the whole way. His purposes, how he's revealing himself to them. And it's really a beautiful formative time. But it can happen through a lot of different stages in our faith, but sometimes it happens after we answer that calling, and our expectations don't quite match with the reality of following God.
Yeah, I love how you described all of that, because it does make you think about the fact that what if they had gone right into the promised land? Would they have had that same connection and relationship of knowing the Lord is our everything? We have to depend on him for everything, and how you had walked through and call it your spiritual wilderness. It did remind me of that, and then you kind of went right into it about the Israelites and how they spent all those years in the wilderness. And I love also how you remind us that even during those times where we feel like it's a drought, or we feel like, where are you? Then he does reveal that he is right there with us through those difficult times, because that is all working together for good for us eventually, how we are molded and we're maturing and being sanctified. Sometimes sanctification doesn't feel so comfy.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I love also how you brought out our expectations, because when we think about calling and we think we were born for this, that kind of thing, where it seems like it should feel like all the puzzle pieces finally fit together and everything's going to run smooth and it's all going to be great. I mean, obviously we don't really think it's always going to be that way, but
Yeah.
do have, like you say, expectations of, if this is what I'm supposed to be doing, it will feel like I'm supposed to be doing it. But sometimes it doesn't, does it?
Right. Yeah, that's exactly true. And I will tell you, one of the most significant things God has taught me in following him and walking through some wilderness times is the idea that I really believe, first and foremost, our calling. It's like when people ask Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? And he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that lines up perfectly with this idea of calling, in that first and foremost, God calls us to himself. He calls us to his heart. He calls us to a love relationship with him. And out of that comes that second commandment, where we reach out to our neighbors and we love them. But we can't truly love them with the love of Christ if we're not first wrapped up and experiencing and daily drenching ourselves in the love of God. And so that's been something I just have to keep coming back to. Like, God is calling me here and to this ministry, yes, but first and foremost, God is calling me to himself. Like, there is no higher, stronger call on my life than just to the heart of God. I think that's his calling for me more than anything else.
Yeah, that's a great and beautiful reminder about putting God first and seeking him first and seeking his face. And now here you are, or there you are in Thailand, right? Tell me about that journey to Thailand and what you all are doing there now.
Well, ever since doing some short-term missions in college, we had this desire to go to some of the more unreached nations of the world. I mean, Thailand is less than 1% Christian. After 7 years in Alaska, debts were paid. We'd had a couple kids. We felt that the time was ripe for us to look at, okay, is that door open to go elsewhere in the world? And our missions agency was starting to work in Thailand. So, kind of funny, we really liked our comfortable position of being paid school teachers in Alaska. And so we looked at paid teaching positions in Thailand. And the area they were working in had 2 international schools. One of them paid and one of them didn't. And so we're trying to get a job at the paid school. But Troy's my husband. Troy calls and they put him on hold for like 30 minutes until finally he gives up and hangs up. He sends an email. They don't reply. The doors just kept closing. And so finally we contacted this other Christian international school, and, especially because they only recruit volunteer teachers, they were like, hey, yes, we definitely have a position for you if you can come. And we thought, well, we can go maybe for a year on our Alaska savings and just raise some minimal support. And then in that time, we can always look around and switch. And I don't even know if we were here a month before we fell so in love with the mission and the community of our school. It's Chiang Rai International Christian School, that we're like, okay, we're in, even though it means like full missionary support raising. We love this because their heart is to serve the servants. And there's so many people in northern Thailand doing so much amazing work, outreach to the unreached hill tribes and Bible translation and human trafficking prevention. And, they have educational needs for their kids. And not all of them are equipped to do that via homeschool. Most of them don't want to send them away to a boarding school. The nearest one is 3 hours away. The Thai school system here is very shame-based and very, you think this way, you do this way. There's no creativity allowed outside of our box. And so most do not want to send their kids to a Thai school either. And so especially coming from that remote place of rural Alaska, we were like, yes, coming here where we can support this community, we realized how beautiful it was to support one another and to walk alongside each other in ministry. This is it. This is our calling right now. So we've gone full-heartedly into the Christian school life here, and I've been overjoyed to get to minister to women here too. I've been allowed to serve on a committee that does annual retreats for the missionary women, and it's just such a precious time of giving them space to connect with one another and with the Lord. And I've really kind of sensed that word connect being a key word that God's putting in my life, to walk into right now, is building connection for people. So I get to do that. I love my women's ministry. And then more recently, it's moved into writing too. And I'm wanting to use my words to help people connect with the heart of God wherever they're at, to be able to give pause in their lives and really kind of that piece that I said about like diving deeper into his love, so that out of that can be the overflow of stepping into their calling. That's where my heart is right now.
I love that. And also that you're able to serve and minister to women
Mm-hmm.
besides your teaching,
Mm-hmm.
and how they just embraced you to come. And especially when the other one, the doors were closing. And it's nice when sometimes you have that bit of a clearer direction that, well, I guess that's not what he wants us to do.
Right, right.
But foreign country too. And as you said, less than 1%
Mm-hmm.
of
Yeah.
Christians there. That is just mind blowing when we think about
Mm-hmm.
here, a church on every corner, and it's difficult to fathom that kind of need for the gospel to be shared
Mm-hmm.
over there. So what is on your horizon?
Well, we've got a couple things where, we're committed to be here for a while. And in the meantime, we've applied to adopt a Thai child. And that's a long, drawn out process. We're trying to do a domestic adoption right through the Thai government. That's been we could go down that rabbit trail of another sense of calling we've had even since before we were married. But that's hopefully, we call him Nemo when we pray for him, because he's like out there lost and,
Aw,
Nemo, we're going to find you.
I
But
love that.
so we're praying Nemo into our family. We don't know how long that's going to take, but that's
Yeah.
coming. And then this book that I'm working on, I've kind of melded my narrative of walking through a season of wilderness in Alaska with just some of the insights that God's given me as I've looked back, and wanting to use this book as a way to say, yeah, you might be in a wilderness season. It might feel dry or like God's not here, but look, this is how it was for me, and God was in it, and he's in it with you too. And here's what he's doing. And, hold on, have faith. He's bringing beauty from ashes, and he's making flowers bloom in the wilderness. And I'm really excited to get this book out there in the next year.
Yeah.
So that's coming.
That just sounds like a whole big dose of hope there,
Yeah.
because a lot of women struggle with feeling that wilderness mentality, or when you're going through it, you don't really feel like you see God there, or you don't know where you're actually heading, but you don't really realize that he's leading you by the hand right through, right in the right direction when you're seeking him and just continually following and trusting in faith. That is
Yeah.
their faith of what we don't see, but then we get to see things, which is so amazing. The fruit or things that happen later, confirmation, or those amazing little precious ways that God encourages us to keep fighting the good fight and persevere. And I love that you have Nemo out there somewhere, and your Thai, little Thai person, whoever that might be, that God knew before the foundations of the earth, and that little person would be part of your family. How are your kids? Are they really excited about that?
They are, especially my older son. I think it's a little hard for him because he's 8, and so he's pretty aware, and we don't really keep things from them. We try to be pretty open, as we're like, well, okay, we haven't heard from the social worker in a long time, or whatever. And if he hears something, he's like, oh, is Nemo coming soon? And he's been waiting. This poor kid's been waiting and anticipating for about 3 years now, that we've been in the process. And yeah, I think it will be a challenge, the adjustment, because we're not even asking for a baby. We're probably going to adopt about 4-year-old, somewhere in that range. But I have faith that God isn't just doing this for Nemo. He's not just stirring my heart. He's working in all of our hearts through this, and that it's going to be something that will be a beautiful way that the Lord can work in my children's hearts too, to really learn what it's like to expand that love and invite somebody in and kind of be the arms of Jesus.
Like you say, it just starts kind of like a wave going and going and going. It just never ends. All that love to give. And so many children need that. And We can do that in Thailand. We can do it in our own backyard here in the U.S., wherever God calls
Absolutely.
us to do that. And that's very inspiring. And I know that your book is going to really bring a lot of hope to people and minister to the hearts of women. So how can women connect with you, Cora?
I have a blog where I do write weekly encouragement for drawing closer to the Lord, connecting with Him. And that's just my name, CorellaRoberts.com. So you can find me there. And then on Instagram, I'm Corella.Roberts, or you can find Corella Roberts on Facebook too. So I'd
Great.
love to connect with listeners in any of those ways. That would be wonderful.
I will put that information in our episode notes so people can find you and connect with you. And I appreciate this. So you're just starting your day where you are.
That's right. The sun's coming up.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. And
Absolutely.
I'm
Thank you.
looking forward to seeing how things develop with all that's going on with your book and how your family expands.
Thank you, Doris. It's been a pleasure.
All righty, friend. Well, we'll talk soon. Thank you for listening, and I hope you were inspired by the words of encouragement and hope Corella shared today. You can connect with Corella at CorellaRoberts.com, and you can also find her on Instagram and Facebook. I'll add those links in the episode notes so you can check it out. I'd also love to connect with you as well. So hop on over to my blog at dorisswift.com. There you'll also find some free gifts. I have an ebook, Step Out of Your Doubt and Into Your Calling, tip sheet for sharing your faith with others, and some fear-fighting scripture verses you can download and print. So where is the place where your passion, compassion, and conviction intersect? Your fierce calling is wherever God is calling you to in the season that you're in right now. Friend, your life has purpose and the world needs your gifts. I'd like to leave you with this encouraging word. Now may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you believe in Him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Romans 15:13. Join me next week when I meet with another woman who is taking action where her passion, compassion, and conviction intersect. Until then, have a blessed week, and I'll talk to you soon.